So monogamy, the only path to happiness? That is the question, right?
Indeed.
So we were talking about it, and is monogamy the only path to happiness when it comes to relationships? And I think the obvious answer is probably no, but that comes with a caveat, right? How are we measuring happiness, right? I think it's an important, thing to take a look at. Now, aside from hard data that's out there, I think that if monogamy is anything like what I consider to kind of be um, built on um, a mesh or a suite of two different people's value systems, right? So
Hmm.
it's kind of like the moral fabric of say the US for an example. There's a moral fabric there that kind of keeps us from eating one another in some instances, right? And I kind of see the same
Graphic
thing.
example.
What's that?
Nothing. Go ahead.
So what I see is monogamy is somewhat similar in a sense that it allows two people to that are already strong to come together and create something even stronger, something more maybe even dynamic in many ways, but where we're independent of quote unquote needing one another, but certainly 100% of complementing one another. um, I think that dynamic does change over time, though, when we look at like a monogamous relationship and how does that keep it, the relationship strong. I think it's values are very, very important. Um, if I value intimacy with one person and I'm seeing someone who values intimacy with multiple people, that's probably not gonna, I'm not gonna be want to be intimate with that person. Right.
Right.
That's just my moral fabric. That's partly what makes up my moral fabric. And I think I would be stronger. And I could be putting a label on this, but I believe just from my own experience, I could put um, probably some weight on the fact that I'd like to strengthen something or have something together with someone in that sense where we have like a strong moral fiber between us in the relationship so that we can share. But what do you think? That's just a little bit of the monogamy of like where I think happiness plays into it. I think having that container that amplifies, that complements each other is super important.
Yeah.
Um, in creating that happiness. But I do think it matters like how are we measuring our happiness as to, how well does it work?
Well, I want to say for our audience's sake that I am going to be playing a bit of the devil's advocate today here in our conversation because Tony and I do discuss a lot of these topics, both on and off camera. And, we've explored a lot of these ideas. And so I think for me today, for the purpose of this conversation, I just want to kind of look at some other angles and some alternatives to monogamy. So I'm going to be, and that doesn't mean that I don't believe in monogamy or believe in, a lot of the things you're saying are true, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Yeah.
To answer your question.
To me, in a monogamous relationship, I can go so much deeper in so many different avenues, in so many different ways, emotionally, spiritually,
Mhm.
physically. Um, I've just witnessed it in other close friendships that I have in their relationships where people have been together for 25, 26, 27 years and didn't realize how much deeper they could love someone after they maybe say went through a serious challenge together, right? I don't know that that would be as possible or maybe as meaningful if I was trying to go so deep into so many relationships.
I
Yeah.
definitely agree with that. I think that how else would you be able to go that deeply unless you're totally focused, on that person and on that relationship and on building it? Same as with business or anything else. If your attention is scattered and if you're not being, super intentional and directing your focus like a laser in the
Mhm.
direction that you want to build and grow in, I think that monogamy exists for that purpose so that we can, evolve deeply as, two people becoming one unit, I guess you could say.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about it earlier. For me, monogamy is that I only want to share these particular moments, these special moments with you, whether it's, spaces or experiences or physical or intimacy, um, you know, and there's something to me that's special about that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that, can argue the opposite, which is probably what we'll do a little bit, right?
Mhm.
But because there are moments, there have been times when I've experienced that. And again, the models, the people that in my life that I quote unquote look up to that have been married for 30 to 50 years, um, there is a sense of like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. It actually equals 11 because we're both whole unto ourselves, or at least responsible to ourselves. And so that way, when we come into a relationship, we're not trying to get people to complete us, but rather to complement us. And I think that's something that, when you connect with that person, and it's not that they're your everything. I don't know that that's something that's I believe in 100% either, but it's also it's they're everything that they understand, right? Like they understand. Like there's times like I like a lot of time alone. I do spend a lot of time alone, but one of my love languages is also um quality of time, right? So for me to be with a partner who understands, like when Tony's with me, he's with me, right? And like that's a priority. Tony also has his alone time and time that he does to think and to read and to do the things that he loves to do that makes Tony Tony. Like she would understand that, she would want that for me.
Right.
Not Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like a real world practical application of how I know I operate. I'm sure other men are going to have different value classes and different love languages and different priorities and things like that. But I think again, it's why I think the key is, especially in a monogamous relationship, it's like it's two people that are kind of keenly focused on being aware. And I think when you do come across that with someone that you share such a bond with, especially when you become, physically, sexually intimate, there's something really special about that. And I think that activates each other on a whole nother level. And sex can do that. Sex can activate people. It can amplify people. It can, have devastating effects to people also, right? If character and things like that aren't necessarily involved in the process, which I think is important to understand the rules. Like again, if it's monogamy, if it's polygamy, or whatever rules people are playing by. To me, monogamy is just it's a fun game. It is a complex game, but the rules are really simple. That's the way I kind of look at it.
Do you think young people struggle with monogamy? Is it
I
something
think
that you have to grow into?
I think a lot of young people are struggling with just to even know what sex is because they're not having it. Listen, it's real easy to be the general after the war, right? Looking at myself and how I grew up and sex and now today seeing how readily available all that information is to people. I think people are, and again, I can't say 100% for young people. I think depending on the households that they're coming from, uh, the influence, the communities that they're a part of, like I think there are still a lot of people, young people, who value monogamy, I believe. I would have to look at the data around that sort of thing to really know. But again, I'm kind of going off suspicion. I believe that there's probably more people that do, but I do know that there's a lot of people that right now are changing all kinds of things, either from they're changing genders as quickly as they're changing their underwear sometimes. So it's like so much of that is moving so fast right now with the influence and again the effects of social media that it's having on the perception of what happiness is or what happy relationships are supposed to be or look like. A lot of that stuff is getting away from probably more of what I was raised with. Let's put it that way.
The climate's definitely changing. I would agree. I think that even though I'm not in Gen Z, obviously I can look and see that Gen Z has so much more exposure just to if not actual options, the perception of options and just how relationships are being presented. Because now the starting point for a relationship is being presented as, okay, here's literally 250 thumbnail photos,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a couple of details about a person. Which one do you like? Oh, you don't like that one? Keep swiping. You don't like that one? Keep swiping. Yep, just keep going, keep going.
Yeah.
And so even the presentation, from the onset is just so different. And I hate to be cynical, but I feel like it just cheapens the whole conversation,
Mm.
in terms of, if monogamy being a thing of value and of, sort of preciousness, or something that you would have to cherish and pour into to build something like that. It's hard to imagine, for these generations that are coming up, how they're going to really get a handle on that,
Mm.
from what I see, especially with,
Yeah, well, you're going to have a lot of, I mean, there's going to be a lot of interesting things that that arise from it. When you start looking at it, like, if you're looking at polygamy, or if you're looking at, some of these other ideas or concepts outside of monogamy, I mean, families, children, how they're raised, who they call, now we're challenging the whole family structure and hierarchy, everything. What impact is that going to have? I mean, there's a reason some of this stuff, is illegal. It's interesting, to say the least. And again, I'm not here to infringe on other people's way of life or happiness, but I think that we're going to begin, and we already probably are starting to see a bit of a backlash of how do I say this? Doing what you want with no repercussions, both for men and women, right? So a lot of that stuff's starting to come to light as you see. A lot of people are realizing time catches up to you. You don't stay young forever, right? So, I think here's the thing: because social media has infiltrated so quickly people's minds about and I loved what you said about perceptions, right? The perception of what they
of
want,
options.
of options, right? I think it's really, really brilliant, because just as fast as that happened, we can shed light, and you're already starting to see it happen on people going, no, this is all kind of BS. Like, right? Like, I think you can't have one without the other happening, just simultaneously at some level of speed, right? So just as quickly as it's infiltrated over the last couple of years, how dating now is all online, it's all swipe right. So I think you're starting to see people that are becoming disenfranchised with the whole idea of it. And they know that, they've been through, it's been on both sides, right? So you get the guy who's got all the girls that he can choose from in the world, and he's just treats them all like however, or, he knows he's got options, and, he's going to kind of work that. Same is true for women. They got like, 1,800 dudes that are coming after him, I think people are realizing they're playing a rigged game. I think people will begin to start to realize, like, what do I do? Because this online dating crap, is not working.
Yeah.
And some people will go, well, how everybody's meeting these days is online. That's great, but how long are those relationships lasting? I can tell you.
That's the more important question, I think.
Well, it's just like a website, right? If you go to, you can tell Google knows the health of a website based on several different authenticating factors. And one of those is going to be time spent on the site. So if Google's going to rank you number one for a particular keyword, and they send you all this traffic, but it all bounces in like 0.2 seconds, it's gone, then Google's going to say, hey, your stuff's not really relevant. We're not going to send people there no more, right? It's the same thing here. When you're looking at our dating life, it's no different, right? So, I just realized that it also comes back down to, it's an inside end job, right? We gotta start to figure out what works to sustain our happiness without another person.
Let me ask you this, because again, devil's advocate, just wondering here. And I am for the family. I am for preserving the family. That is something that I do hope that our culture and our current, uh, you know, generation can, you know, figure out, and something that I do believe should be upheld. But I want to ask, is there, because it all sounds so nice the way you describe it. It all sounds, you know, very, you know, special and everything. But, you know, we see on the news and in the media, we see every time a high profile individual is sort of caught with their pants down,
Mhm.
you know, or caught cheating, or, you know, another family kind of torn apart. And I know even as a young woman, um, seeing those types of stories happen, and we
Mhm.
hear them in real life too. It's not only exclusive to
Mhm.
celebrities, of course. But as a young woman, I remember thinking, well, if it's so hard for a man to be monogamous or a woman to be monogamous, or for two people to just be with the one person, why do we keep trying to do this? And I was just wondering your thoughts on that. Um, you know, if you can think of any cases where.
Yeah. So I can tell you, you just said that, like, why can't they remain or, stay in that space with other people? The number one reason is they can't be in the space for themselves or with themselves. Right. So I'm not saying that everyone who gets married is flawed. Right. I mean, but we all have our own stuff in some way, shape, or form. Many of us have worked through it. Many of us have not, if we're very, very honest. Right. So, I think, again, being someone who's been married, I know the reason I got divorced was it wasn't that I couldn't be with her, it's that I couldn't be with myself, looking back. Now, most people would just be like, that makes no sense. They were this, they did this, they did that. It's like, yeah, that's all could be very true. But what did I get mean about me? Right. And that's going to be a different answer for everybody. I think that, you know, it sounds wonderful to get married and have the white picket fence in many cases, or whatever that looks like for some people. And for some people that actually becomes, reality. It's because they work through it. They figure the things out. Um, do I have regrets? Yeah, I have regrets, of course, around relationships, around, um, you know, the regrets in a way that I'm looking at it, like, I regret what I did, or maybe some of the choices I made. I could have made better character choices, right? That's kind of the way I look at it. There was a time when I was ashamed, which was much more dangerous and much more damaging, right? Still, as a human being, I can occasionally, I can look up and I can be, oh, like, oh, like, I regret doing that, or regret, that decision, or what would it have been if I had stuck with it longer, like those sort of things. Like, did I abandon those types of life lessons that I, that could have helped forged me and that relationship to be something stronger? See, now I
Right.
don't, right? Like, looking back, that's something I could ask myself, like, looking back at my character then and some of my choices that I made, I'm like going, yeah, dude, you screwed up, you know, but could I make a case or a narrative for that it wasn't my fault? Of course I could, but that doesn't serve me in being any more wiser, or actually being a man now of that character who can then, you know, align with someone who shares the same character and the same values. Maybe they didn't have to gain the same character through the same trials, right? Maybe very different, and maybe they never had to go through any of that, and maybe they had a fantastic bringing up. That's cool too, right? But either way, it's like you appreciate that more so, I think, from a monogamous standpoint, when you have two people that have kind of gone through life, taken responsibility, and decide, like, hey, you're doing okay without me, I'm doing okay without you, maybe we can come together and do something really special. And that's like, there's so much fun behind that, and challenges.
Hmm. So, do you think monogamy comes down to a sort of moral choice? Do you think it means, if you're monogamous, if you choose to participate in that as a value or as a way of life, is that speak to, you know, morality in some way?
I mean, this is a personal choice, and it's going to be personal for everyone. I don't really, I mean, being Christian for me, like monogamy is a thing. Like it's just something that I still feel and believe in firmly, period.
So is monogamy a moral choice?
I want to make sure I heard it right. So for me, I believe it is, vastly because there's a structure there that for me is simple to understand. Um, I don't need to memorize a whole bunch of stuff. I don't need to, read a ton of different things about it, right? Um, I'll take care of me, you take care of you. Together, we can create something that takes care of both of us, right? But we never abandon ourselves for one another. So to me, it's a moral choice because I've lived immorally and my life was painful. There were consequences. It was dark, right? Like I'm just, it was what it was. And those were immoral choices. And now looking back, and sometimes I didn't realize that because they were made from a place of pain. There were times I started to begin aware of what I was doing, but I did not change. So what does that say of my character? And then there was points and times where I finally was like, okay, enough of that. That's not who I choose to be anymore. This is too painful. Let's move on. I feel as if in relationships, especially like monogamy wise, like being a moral choice, yes, because I would feel if I'm at the same altitude, going in the same direction at the same speed as this person, then I'm not interested in sharing that intimacy with multiple people, because now I'm also playing the numbers game. Like how many people, right? Oh, so I'm only sleeping with this person, but this person over here is fun to do this with. And this person over here is fun. Well, I sleep with them sometimes too, but they're also mostly fun for this. And then to me, it's just complicated. Like there's more variables, there's more sexual diseases, right? There's more fear, or you all are able to at least get the truth on the table so you know what you're dealing with, right?
Well, and I want to jump in here because speaking about monogamy in terms of its morality or ethics, what all of that means, I just pulled up the definition here of ethical non-monogamy, ENM. Now, I know you're not an expert on ENM because we just, dove into this, a few minutes before we jumped on here, but it's just the definition of it is there are numerous ways to practice ethical non-monogamy, all of which involve open communication between all parties involved, the practice of taking part in romantic relationships that are not completely exclusive between two people, and the idea that being that there's no lying going on, therefore there is no cheating, therefore I think the idea is to remove the betrayal quotient of what it means to not only to just to be with one person. And so some people feel that you can live a moral life that way as well, because you're living in an open way where you're communicating and you're transparent with your partner about other activities or partners, I suppose.
That's an interesting perspective because, there's no this, there's no that, there's no this happening. Is there no one feeling anything? Because that to me would be like a big thing that comes up for people, that even though there's no lying, there's no cheating, like what happens when somebody catches feels and they're like, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced with anybody else again. I don't want to, like, you're the only one I want to see. And Joe is like, yo, check, we had this conversation, I've got, Lisa and Anna and, and I'm being open about that. Like now what happens? Now you've got what's called entanglement. Right. Now we've got what are called consequences. And consequences aren't necessarily bad or good. They are what they are. They're either useful or they're not useful to what you're aiming at and what you want to experience. So for me, I see a lot of like where that wouldn't work for me. I'm not saying it couldn't work for other people, but eventually people are going to have feelings. And and here's the thing, here's what I find kind of funny about it. It's like, oh, well, as long as we're upfront and we're honest, most people still aren't being upfront and honest with themselves. How can they possibly be upfront and honest with other people in this charade of, hey, I'm healthy, you're healthy, let's all just have a bunch of engagements with all kinds of different people and have sex and be totally open about it. And it's, and that's cool. Like maybe you can lay your head down at night until you start feeling shit, until you start having feels. And then that, he's over at Lisa Marie's tonight. And then the other one's at this, and it's like, and you're just like, oh my God, like I just had this amazing, deep experience with him. Was that not real? And he's with other, like,
It's
that's,
hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that being, it's hard to imagine choosing that.
that's a fair statement. Yeah.
I haven't chosen that for myself, but I've always been open to the idea of alternatives to monogamy. I won't say which or what or how it would look, but I've always been open to these ideas. And yet when you break it down on just the most not even technical, but the most essential level, like, again, I'm having this really deep experience or this love experience with this person. Okay, now on Tuesday, he's over here with this other person. And then
what are we making that mean? And what we're going to make that mean is going to be based on our childhood stuff. Like what's our framework of a healthy relationship or a not healthy relationship, or just what's a familiar relationship, which doesn't make it good or bad. It just might not be useful in most cases. Right. From my experience, it's like, what models did we have? And so what are we going to therefore model ourselves?
Well, then that sounds to me like you are kind of leaving a little bit of room for an interpretation of someone being with multiple people, because you're saying, what would I make that mean about myself if I'm having a reaction to, this person that I'm seeing, or this person I'm in a relationship with, going and being with other people?
Yeah.
Is that not what you meant?
No. I was like, yeah, I was actually agreeing with you, because it's like, what is our mind making this mean about us? Like,
Oh,
right. Like, what are we making that situation mean? I think, and that was kind of like my point where I was saying, where some people just, they don't know what they don't know yet until they go through these situations. But it's like, when I first went through a situation where someone, quote unquote, cheated, I made it mean I wasn't important. And every time that it happened, I would always make it mean I wasn't important. But I knew where that came from, from my childhood. Right. So, yeah, it's about, what would you make that mean? So if he's with you that night and you had a great experience, and then the next night he's with somebody else, it's like, yeah, what are you going to make that mean? Not only about the situation, but what are you going to make that mean about you? Do you mean like, oh, well, I'm grateful I had the experience, it was amazing, but I realize I don't want this. What a great gift that is. Let me move on. Like, in a perfect world, that's how we would show up. That's not always how it works though, right? Because we have feels, we're conflicted, we kind of want this, but we're in the middle of, like, we're in the middle of morals. Like what are we going to choose here? Is this morally, ethically work for me? Like, being morally and ethically is one thing, but morally and ethically, does it work for me? Well, your body's going to tell you that in a lot of cases. Your nervous system's going to tell you that in a lot of cases.
interesting. So do you think that people who live a sort of more poly lifestyle, that their nervous system isn't activated by?
I don't know that for a fact. I would say that it would be an interesting research to see, or I don't doubt that there's data on it, but it would be interesting to see. It's like, if they're polyamorous, it's like, what kind of dopamine level are these individuals used to, in these polyamorous, scenarios and situations. It's like, it's kind of like with every new high, like you got to get higher. So it needs a new high, It would be interesting to see if that is some of what plays out, in that, in that community. But I don't know. I'm not making any snap judgments of what that makes it mean about them in general.
I think that most women And I know it's a big thing for men as well, because you always hear about how, for men, cheating is a complete deal breaker, right?
Mhm.
Whereas for a woman, if the man is caught cheating, there might be some chance for reconciliation or forgiveness, or,
Mhm.
you know, coming, but
It depends on how in demand that male is. That's another way of looking at it. Like, how in demand is he? Right. So if he's a desirable and an in demand, guy, right, she might be more likely to try to make things work, especially if there's children involved, right? But if not, if he's not so desirable, in the marketplace, then yeah, she might be more willing to, to let it go. It's interesting that you kind of look at it from a couple different ways.
yeah, that is really interesting. And I think that that's something that a lot of, the, manosphere might make that argument, that a very masculine man, or a man with a lot of resources, would
Mhm.
be even possibly entitled to having, multiple women, or more
See,
than
that's
one
where
woman.
I don't agree with that part. That's where my moral stuff comes in. It's like, dude, one woman, right? Like, one woman, period. Right. Like, it's not up for negotiation. At this point, I'm 50. I've kind of figured some things out that work for me, that, that I've done some work around. And it's like, even if I'm doing, multiple seven figures, that doesn't entitle me morally. That doesn't speak well for me. Like, I'm not entitled to anything. What I am looking is to marry and match with someone who's at a similar altitude, going the same direction at the same speed, and wants to build something in an intimate container together that can be expansive, for both us and whatever comes beyond that. Right.
Hmm.
To me, that is way more important to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think getting through challenges together is what deepens the relationship.
Everybody got it wrong. They think it's all this other stuff. Got to take them on fancy dates and get them roses and all this kind of, no, you got to get through challenges. Like, to me, that's like, I don't look at it as like I'm trying to like test women or anything. I do pay attention to things just because I can't help to do it. I like doing it and it's part of my makeup, but it's, yeah, it's picking up on that like right away.
I don't want to frame everything in the context of, well, of course, women want monogamy and men are the more difficult sex to sort of wrangle or convince about it. But let's just make a really generalized assumption here that uh, women, would like to be with one man. And for the guys out there who are kind of wondering, what is the benefit of being monogamous? Why go that route? Especially in today's world where you can find somebody for just about any type of lifestyle you can dream up, that'll sort of wants to, participate in that.
Mhm.
Why monogamy? Why should I get on board with that?
Yeah. I mean, from a guy's perspective, and again, this is strictly from mine, this is not for men in general. To me, there's far less risk. There's far less challenge that comes from going into multiple relationships. Like, I can just say that, you know, that men that are married, now mind you, I'm divorced. So again, I'm leaning into a lot of this as myself. Um, but being in a healthy relationship has so many more, even just health benefits to it. The challenge is when you're not in a relationship where you're both at the same altitude, going in the same direction at the same speed. So therefore you don't share similar value systems, and that stuff's never discussed, any of that sort of thing. You're going to end up with a lot of divorces, which is what we're seeing now. In the US, we're seeing vast majority of like over 60+% of of marriages end in divorce. And I really do believe that it comes down to, we just don't know ourselves nearly as well as we could and can. Um, and so for men, especially, that I talk to all the time, when they're, because I have actually had this conversation around like, finding a good woman. And I'm like, okay, you don't go finding a good woman. You just do your life, right? You do the stuff that brings you alive, be on purpose with yourself. You know, a lot of things that Jordan Peterson has shared, and some other, you know, really, like Jim Rohn, for goodness sakes, is, you know, so full of like wise stuff that I heard but didn't get it until I lived through it. And I think, you know, like monogamy is something of a very sacred, very sweet container that if two people done well, um, can amplify their lives beyond whatever they can do alone. I do believe that's possible. And when I say that, like, yes, there are men that can be wealthy and have a lot of money and, you know, be the Andrew Tates of the world. And that's cool. I don't hate on Andrew. I love Andrew. At the same time, that's not every man needs to be Andrew, right? And I think, you know, a man that is in a container like that, where, you know, you share a relationship with God, you have this relationship with your, you know, the love of your life in that sense. And I think that grows you. And I don't think it, I see it. A lot of people that I'm connected to are modeled and are modeling. It's like, that's where I see a lot of their strength come from. Not just as individuals, they have a lot of strength, but it's together as that unit. There's the trust, there's that bond, there's, you know, amazing sex still after 50 years, you know, with, you know, some of my friends that have been married over 50 years. It's like some of that stuff I don't know that any of us have had the pleasure of experiencing, because maybe we've either not entered into the union of monogamy, or we've entered into it with maybe not the same character that would have served that monogamous relationship. And I know I'm definitely fall into that category of not being monogamous, and the consequences that come to that, both in character, you know, and physically and financially in the other ways. So a little bit of a long answer, but I think it deserved it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make a case for monogamy in this day and age, because you know, there's people, all different types of lifestyles are, you know, it's okay for whoever wants that, but I think that we should still be, I for myself, I'll just speak for myself, like you speak for yourself. But I still want to strive for that ideal of, you know,
Yeah.
one man, one woman, you know, being married and committing to each other wholeheartedly. And I haven't been on that journey yet, but I think there's a lot to look forward to. I definitely see it in my parents. My parents have been married for over 35 years, and they're each other's best friend.
Yeah.
And, you know, they totally are, they're each other's person.
Yeah.
And so I love having that example as well. Um, you know, in my parents, I love seeing that.
That's perfect. Good. This has been a fun little back and forth today.
It's been a fun chat with you today, Tony.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, these are always good times. Yeah, I just always appreciate doing these with you, and thank you for going back and forth with me today.
Yeah, thanks for being open and sharing your story. We are going to dive into lots of different topics like these. So if you stuck with us till the end, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and check us out next week in another episode.
Boom.